Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the Bailey is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Three Technique, the college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. We've reached the SEC, and gentlemen, we are throwing a block party all week long. The grill is hot, the ice is cold, the drinks will be flowing. Come on through and party it up as we preview the Southeastern Conference. Trey, today we are taking on the bowl hopefuls, the dark horses. It's kind of a one big mix based off of the Jimmies and the Joes voting. We've got some bones to pick with our fan base who, for the record, is usually right and usually knows a little bit more about football than us, evidently. But boy, there are some interesting results in the survey that we sent out, the order that we're going to be previewing these teams. We will get to that. You and Chris did a fantastic job setting up the storylines for the conference, Monday's episode. So if you've not gotten a chance to listen to that, please go back and give that a listen. Chris Lee from Southeastern 16 did a tremendous job really setting the table, I think, for football in the SEC this season. But Trey, with that, we've got 10 teams to preview this evening, and I'll turn it over to you, my friend.
Well, thank you very much, Mitch. And yeah, you're right. We do have some bones to pick with the Jimmies and Joes, but it makes it not really fall into pretty tiers with the way that the rankings turned out. So, if you're one of the fans of these teams that we also have bone to pick, just know that we're picking bones with you. And maybe our fan base will be right. We've definitely been surprised by some of the rankings in the past and come up on the short end of that prediction, just like you said. But I don't think there's much debate at number 16 coming in at the bottom of the league. It's going to be the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Coming off a 2-10 year last year, 0-8 in conference play. Jeff Lebby's first season, not great, really searching for an identity all year long. They did lose 4 close games. They were 0-4 in games decided by 10 points or less, but anytime you get blown out by a team from the MAC in the non-conference portion of the schedule, it's not going to be a good season for you, and just a not really great way to start off. But they were kind of up against it for a good portion of the year. Blake Shapen injured in the 4th game of the year last year. He gets a redshirt year. Former conference champion Blake Shapen, I might add, at Baylor a few years back, if you remember that far back. Still playing college football, still gets one more year. Back leading the offense this year. They brought in some competition for him. Didn't really work out in the spring. Bringing in a couple guys that they thought would push Shapen, but it does look like Shapen's going to be the guy. Around the team, guys, it's really hard to find positives, I will confess. But I did find one. I really do like the running back group. They bring back a couple of guys. They bring back Devon Booth and Johnny Daniels. They combined for almost 1,300 yards last year, actually 1 yard short at 1,299. They also brought in Fluff Bothwell from South Alabama, who averaged 7.5 yards per carry for the Jaguars last fall. I like the backfield. That's a really good positive place to start. Outside of that, I'll turn it over to you guys. If you guys have a positive nugget that I'm missing, the defensive line couldn't get much worse than they were last year. Brought in 10 transfers. Rasheem Thomas from Northern Illinois looks like a nice piece there. Outside of that, I'm at a loss for finding positive ways for Jeff Lebby here too.
I feel so bad for Hail State fans because, gosh, they're such a loyal fan base, such a unique fan base down there in Stark Vegas. For as much as we hate when our team goes to play there, the game day atmosphere certainly is, I think, one of the more exciting atmospheres in college football. That being said, though, this team is going to be really bad again this year. I don't think we're breaking any news for Mississippi State fans. We did a lot of research on these teams, as we do all these teams in preparation. And I couldn't even really find that many optimistic takes from the insiders, right? From their own people. I will say a couple of interesting pieces at wide receiver. Brennan Thompson comes over from Oklahoma. Anthony Evans III comes over from Georgia. So, this was a wide receiver core that watched just about everybody worth their salt walk out the door, which was a tough thing to stomach. Kamario Taylor is the name at quarterback that I want people to know. He's a 4-star true freshman that came in. You mentioned Luke Cromanhook, I believe, is who you were referring to earlier from, I think it was Florida State. And then I can't remember if he transferred to Southern Miss or if that was a different former Florida State failure. Cromanhook's not going to win this job, though. What I do want to see is Kamario Taylor take over sometime during the season. I think we know what Blake Shapen's ceiling is/was. He's battled with injuries. It's not been the career that Blake certainly hoped he would have. But Kamario Taylor is a dual threat kid with a big arm. And I'd like to see him get some reps this year. And in all likelihood, what's going to be another tough season. I mean, gosh, their schedule is brutal. Probably picking about 3-9 for Mississippi State. And that honestly might be being optimistic. I think Southern Miss, Alcorn State, Northern Illinois are probably their wins. I just don't see them. I can't pick them on paper getting a win over another SEC team. And, that may put Jeff Lebby in a bad spot in a hot seat, to be sure. But this team, to be honest, just isn't all that talented outside of the running back room, which you mentioned. And, the defense, Isaac Smith is the leading tackler. He comes back. He's kind of a hybrid linebacker safety. He's the lone proven commodity on that side. So when it comes to, new names in versus just proven capabilities on the team, I'm left with a lot more questions than answered, I think, for Mississippi State.
Yeah, the hard thing for me about Mississippi State is there were definitely some bright spots last year, but just about all of those bright spots walked out the door, and you're kind of left sitting here with an empty bucket and saying, hey, we got to find a way to keep rebuilding. And look, Jeff Lebby's a good coach. I think he's going to get them turned around. And, to kind of echo what you said, Mitch, it's a great fan base. Like, they're going to get behind their team and support them. And so, they're going to turn it around at some point. A program like Mississippi State doesn't stay down forever. But I don't think they get up this year. I don't think this is the year for them. It's unfortunate, but they're just going to probably – like one of the things we were saying a lot, last week with the Big Ten was, someone's going to have to lose all these games. That's probably double true with some of the teams on the schedule for Mississippi State. Like, someone's going to lose all the games. It's probably going to be a lot of Mississippi State losing those games this year. It sucks that they're in this position. I do think they can start to build. They're going to need to see some bright spots this year, or else obviously it's going to be a tough rebuild. Watching your roster continue to get just kind of, dinked and dunked, and then take a little piece here, take a little piece there when it hits a transfer portal. But if you can start to build a little momentum and start to develop some guys, I think that's what you're looking for this year, is to start to watch players that can break out and show you a little bit of the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. Looking for the future. I don't think they're going to be as outclassed athletically as they were in conference games last year. You look at, I was reading Phil Steele's write-up on Mississippi State, and he basically said, when they look outsized by Toledo on both sides of the line of scrimmage, it doesn't bode well. I don't think that's going to happen this year. You look up and down the depth chart, they brought in a lot of transfers, both sides of the line of scrimmage on the offensive and defensive lines, a lot of bigger dudes that are at least physically going to be up to snuff for games in the SEC. Don't know if the skill's there quite yet on both sides of the line of scrimmage to actually translate to wins, but I definitely think you could see this be a 4-8 team instead of a 2-10 team. And I think if you're a Bulldog fan going into the season, you'll take that.
Yeah, go beat Arkansas on the road. Find a way to win one of your home games in conference. The problem is the schedule is just gross. They were one of those two teams that got absolutely the short end of the stick from the SEC office, right, when they decided to play favorites. And, a team like Texas got some very favorable draws. Teams like Oklahoma and Mississippi State got zero favors. So I feel like no matter what you're looking for as far as progress athletically, I think you're going to have to take your hope and your happiness from things other than the win column.
Let's go up to number 15 on the list from our Jimmies and Joes, and that is the Kentucky Wildcats. This is another team that really struggled last year. Mark Stoops flirted with Texas A&M. Former Texas A&M head coach Mark Stoops came back after about 4 hours on the job in College Station.
Yep.
And he didn't really put himself in the good graces of the fan base after making those flirtations. 4-8 season, a 1-7 mark in conference play. They did somehow knock off Ole Miss in Oxford, which is just remains hilarious to me that they somehow found a way to do that. And it's going to be a completely retooled look on the offensive side of the football, guys. Zach Calzada still playing college football, and this fall he will be doing it in Lexington, Kentucky. If you remember Zach Calzada, he was one of the architects of that big Texas A&M upset over Alabama all the way back in 2021. Spent some time at Auburn, didn't really get to see the field because of injuries, but the last 2 years, guys, I don't know if you've looked up his stats, pretty good at Incarnate Word. He's thrown for 6,200 yards, a bunch of touchdowns, I think over 50 touchdowns. He's been slinging the rock around in San Antonio, and that's exactly what the Wildcats need. I can't remember the last time that I've been confident in a Kentucky pass game. Even with Will Levis a few years ago, you're kind of just waiting on him to throw an interception at some point. So if Calzada can take care of the football, just be a consistent threat in the passing game, I think that's automatically going to take a step up for Kentucky. Elsewhere on the offense, they do have a good-looking running back room also, with Jamarian Wilcox coming back, Dante Dowdell coming in from Nebraska, and Seth McGowan coming in from New Mexico State. They lost Dane Key out wide, which is going to be a massive loss for them. He was one of the lone bright spots, really took over portions of that Ole Miss game last year and willed them to a victory when that offense was stalling out. But, I mean, on the offensive side of the ball, I go back to it. Consistent passing game is going to be key. I feel confident that Kentucky can figure out a running game, but they've got to figure out a way to replace that production from Dane Key, and they've got to find a way for Zach Calzada to just consistently distribute the ball, not turn it over, and actually have it be a threat so that run game can work.
Yeah, Barian Brown gone to the portal as well. So Jamori Macklin, I believe, is the leading returner out wide. They bring in a couple of guys for Calzada to throw to. Kendrick Law from Alabama is one of the names that you'll recognize probably if you're a college football fan. The offensive line is the key to me, at least on the offensive side. They were awful last year. They couldn't protect the pass. They could not set up the running game. This year, they bring in 6 transfers to try and fix that offensive line. So, Calzada certainly carved it up at UIW and did a great job at the FCS level. It's a different speed. And he's been in the SEC, so maybe that gives him an advantage coming back to what he formerly knew. I mean, he played fine at Texas A&M. There wasn't a ton of help out wide for him when he was in Aggieland. And then you mentioned just never really saw the field at Auburn. It didn't feel like a good fit when he left for the Plains in the first place. And so that kind of felt like a wasted year. But if they can keep him upright and give him time to throw the ball, we've seen him be a difference maker. I'm still of the mind that we should build him a statue for that 2021 upset. So, let Calzada cook.
Yeah, he's one of those guys, and, we joked when he was at A&M that you didn't really get to see him get going until he started to get hurt. It seemed like every time he left the field, a little bit banged up, he'd come back out and, really turned it up, right? So, if Kentucky's got to find a way to get the magic glow stick going or something, they're going to have to figure it out. But, it's just another one of those programs that kind of similar to Mississippi State, we were just saying, really just felt like all of the good things that you could have said about the team last year ended up getting stolen by other teams and kind of snatched out the portal real quick. You guys mentioned Dane Key and Barian Brown. Those are two, massive guys combined for over 1,000 yards. Lots of production to replace. I think a lot of times with the portal era, we kind of have to look around and say, well, there's a lot of transfers that came in. So a lot of the teams are going to sit there and look at their own guys and say why they're so excited about them. And if you don't like the team, you're going to sit there and tell you, why they're actually not very good and they transferred in the first place. I'm maybe a little bit more pessimistic on the supporting cast they brought in to really turn things around and save them. But hey, maybe just a different mix of guys, a different group of guys to say different things in the locker rooms, just a slightly different message, get some of the stink out of there, right? Where, a lot of the guys last year probably didn't like being in the locker room that came in and, only won one game in conference. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do that. Lot of turnover on that defensive side really concerns me for them. I don't know that they're going to be stopping a whole lot of people this year. So we'll kind of see how that goes and if the pieces gel correctly on that side of the ball as well.
Yeah, Trey, Kentucky's calling card for the last several years has been defense. And last year, they didn't have anything going for them. They lose a guy like Keyshawn Silver, I believe, to USC, a former 5-star defensive tackle. So is there anything on the defense that you kind of found, excuse me, that gives you hope that the Wildcats can get back to kind of traditional form over there?
Yeah, the secondary, I think, is going to be the bright spot on the defense. They bring 3 starters back in the back end. Front 7, though, is going to be just a complete unknown going into this year. There's a couple teams like this in the SEC, all in this episode that we'll talk about today, but they're one of them. They're just going to rely on a lot of dudes that haven't proven it at this level of college football. Maybe put up some stats. Brought in a nice, intriguing edge piece, Marquise Humphrey Grace out of South Dakota. 9.5 sacks up there for in the Missouri Valley, I guess. I was about to say the Jackrabbits, but I don't want South Carolina or South Dakota to get mad at me because that's their biggest rival, I believe. But just intriguing pieces like that. But, the Missouri Valley, as good as it is the FCS, is just a big transition from being able to do it in the trenches in the SEC. So it's a lot of unknowns. The schedule, it's another team that gets no favors from the schedule. How's this for a stretch, guys? Middle portion of the year, they get Toledo at home to open, who is the preseason favorite in the MAC. Ole Miss at home to Eastern Michigan. But then this middle portion, at South Carolina, at Georgia, get a bye week, host Texas and Tennessee, then go to Auburn and host Florida all in consecutive weeks. That's absolutely brutal. And even if they are starting to figure it out, it might not even translate in the win-loss column just because of the teams that they're up against.
They're chipping uphill. There's no doubt about it. There are no gimmies on this schedule. At Vandy, is after that brutal slate, and then they have to go to Louisville to finish the season. So, I mean, there's a legitimate case that it could be, it could get dark early by the end of September for Kentucky fans. One more name I'll call out, David Gusta comes over from Washington State. He was an animal last year up on the Palouse. He'll be at nose guard this year, trying to replace Silver along that defensive line. But yeah, and this is one of those kind of narrative shifts, I feel like, where maybe even last year, I think it was last year, we were talking about, okay, jokes on Mark Stoops for nearly leaving, but all he has to do is just kind of keep the ship from overturning, and Kentucky will never get rid of him because they love going to bowl games, and that's it. And then he stepped on the landmine, and they go 4-8. And
now he's on the hot seat.
And now he's on the hot seat. And truly, I think it's going to be an example of the grass is not always greener. And, sometimes you truly need to look around and smell the roses.
And also a reminder that you too can impact your decision makers if you just throw a big enough fit on Twitter. So remember that the next time that your school floats a potential coaching candidate, if you're making a change. Guys, let's move on to a more positive storyline. Let's go to Nashville and talk about the Vanderbilt Commodores. 7-6, 3-5 in the league last year, coming out of nowhere, absolutely nowhere. Diego Pavia and Jerry Kill bring their magic from Las Cruces all the way up to Nashville, and nobody was ready for it, including the Alabama Crimson Tide. Still the most watched, the most streamed episode of this podcast is the live reaction show that we did after that game. It was a magical day. It was a magical night in Nashville that had the goalposts going down the river, but people forget that they did it pretty often last year. Virginia Tech, who they beat week 1, was a trendy ACC pick for a lot of people. They went into, Mitch raises his hand if you're listening on the podcast platform.
Whoops.
They went into some SEC road venues and got road victories. They did lose to Georgia State, but we gloss over that.
Don't
because
talk
the rest
about
of it
that.
was so good. We don't need to talk about it. They avenged their time in the state of Georgia by beating Georgia Tech in a bowl game. So all in all, extremely successful campaign last year. It was the first winning season since James Franklin's last year in 2013 and the first bowl game since 2018. So can't say enough good things about what happened. We didn't think that Diego Pavia was going to get a chance at an encore, but guys, he found a way. He found a loophole in a lawsuit, and he has paved the way. Whatever you think of that, we do get to see Diego Pavia again. And because of that, this is a team that I think could really outperform this number 14 ranking that the Jimmies and Joes have given them. They're number 8 in returning production, according to Bill Connolly. They're one of only 8 teams in the whole country that brings 70% of production back from last year. And it's on both sides of the football. They're bringing back their top running backs, their top 2 running backs. Eli Stowers is getting some hype as maybe the tight end 1 in the NFL draft next spring. The O-line's rebuilt a little bit, but Phil Steele reported that Clark Lee feels the best about this offensive line that any he's ever had at Vanderbilt. You flip it over to the defensive side of the ball, tons of production back on that side of the ball. They have a legit linebacking core. I'm struggling to see why Vandy can't make a jump and maybe start to establish themselves as not even just sneaking into a bowl, but maybe pushing for 7 or 8 wins.
I think for me, the only thing that keeps me from diving in head first is the schedule. And we'll talk about that in a minute after the roster breakdown. You mentioned the offensive line, very talented transfer pieces coming over. Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, South Dakota, I believe, were spots that they pulled transfers from. The defense, a lot of production comes back. The secondary was the weakness of the team last year, 97th in total pass defense, but I kind of like them to improve with a couple of returners. Martrell Height looks like he could be special at the cornerback position. And then a top 50 scoring defense last year in 2024. I mean, they really, you think back to their wins over Auburn and Alabama, and they confused both of those offenses. At times, we saw those offenses move the ball at will and do kind of whatever they wanted to do. And credit to the Doors for stopping much more talented teams on paper and doing something we hadn't seen in decades from the Commodores as far as beating both teams in the state of Alabama. So I do think that they've got enough talent to be a very complete roster. I'm just not so sure about this schedule, though. It's brutal.
Gary, before you jump in here, I just want to say it is brutal as a player, but it is an absolute dream as a college football fan. It's a bucket list schedule.
Yeah,
they have a night game in Blacksburg, a night game in Columbia, South Carolina. They go to Bryant-Denny, DKR, Neyland. Like, if I'm just a fan, that's amazing. But I don't want to go to all those places as a player.
Well, and that's kind of the tough part. What I was about to jump in and say is that all those games are on the road, right? Like all those games that they like pulled last year, like almost, but like they put the fear of God into the Texas Longhorns. That was at home, right? So like doing that at home versus doing that on the road are 2 very different things. Whatever you think of their experience and, some of the Pavia comments that he's made in the offseason, like whatever you want to say about that, that is what it is. I love the confidence. I love the fact that we're 22 minutes into this podcast and we're talking about Vanderbilt because they weren't just the first auto team at the bottom of the conference. Like that's something that I think a lot of Vanderbilt fans should hang their hats on, is the fact that we are, several teams now into this podcast talking about Vanderbilt. And I'm not entirely sure that I agree they should be down this low with how, they looked last season. They got a lot of good pieces. They got a lot of good players. I'm not saying that I'm going to predict them to go out here and make a real push at the conference or anything like that, but they should be able to get back to a bowl game. I would think that they're back in a bowl game this year. It's again, the road games are tough, but if they can keep, again, the experience of the quarterback, the kind of leadership, the culture that they built, if they can keep some of that, they can go on the road and beat a team that's just a little bit better than them. I'm not going to pick them to go on the road, go beat Bama at Bama, go beat Texas at Texas. But there's some teams on there that they could definitely, pull a little bit of a streak and get a little hot there towards the end of the season as well.
I actually think, Trey, and tell me where you land on this. I think if I can get them to 5-7 pretty comfortably. I think that they should be on the verge of making a bowl game. If they could beat Missouri or Auburn at home, I've got those 2 as the swing games. Both within the friendly confines where they did some special things last year. So, Missouri, we're about to talk about very, very shortly here. I disagree where they are on this list, but, Auburn, not necessarily a sure thing, right? Certainly not on a week-to-week basis. We haven't seen Hugh Freeze do anything consistently on the Plains. So, and, Drink is kind of good for a game that he loses every year that makes you scratch your head. So I think the path is there for a bowl game. I just personally am not locking them in quite yet.
Yeah, I'm definitely not ready to lock them into that. I'm not ready to say that, they're going to definitely make the bowl game, definitely get there, because at some point you have to ask yourself, is that just, a one-off season? Is there a regression to the mean coming? And gosh, I hope not. But it seems like yeah, there's going to be a lot of ramp up in the beginning of that schedule. I think the last couple games could be interesting. I really like that game at the end of the season against Tennessee, especially if there's any stakes in it. Like if Vanderbilt's at 5 wins and they got to go beat Tennessee to make a bowl game, I really like the implications for that one as well.
We'll hopefully get a better result than last year when Vandy was trying to keep Tennessee out of the playoff and they kind of got railroaded. Trey, your dogs were going nuts.
They were going a little nuts, but I think we got them calmed down. So yeah, we'll just going through. Well,
excited about the Commodores.
Evidently, they're going nuts again. So how about this? We'll move on from Vanderbilt. We'll let Trey get the dogs silenced temporarily. And guys, I don't understand. This is the biggest bone that I've had to pick with the Jimmies and the Joes. And listeners, we love you. We gave away home field. We gave away a free copy of College Football 26. I'm going to need somebody to jump in the comments here and explain what in the world Missouri is doing next on our list. Trey, you just give me a thumbs up when you're ready to take over the wheel again. This team is a top 20 defense that's returning 7 starters from last year. They have a stout offensive line, a very solid rushing attack, and a blue chip quarterback that sure is going to be brand new to the program. But boy, if Bo Prabula can scratch that ceiling, I think Missouri is well above what is this, 13th, 14th ranked
13th.
team on this list? 13th.
Yeah, 13th from the Jimmies and Joes. And man, the combination of that defense, we'll talk about the schedule in a second. It was much maligned last year when they got to 10 wins. But I think I'll forgive the Jimmies and Joes for overlooking that a little bit because they do lose a lot on the offensive side of the football. And this is a team that for the last few years, at least, has really found the identity. The defense has been really good. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Like you said, it was top 20 last year. But the identity, I think, has been on the offensive side of the football. Sure. And especially when you lose guys like Luther Burden and Theo Weiss at the wide receiver position, you lose the starting quarterback, you lose most of the rushing production. It's easy to see why the Jimmies and Joes might think that there's going to be a step back from this team. But you mentioned Bo Prabula. I think that's a great replacement. He was kind of a gadget player for Penn State the last couple of years, but I think that he is plenty talented enough to lead an offense on his own. Definitely flashed in some games at Penn State. Top 2 running backs are gone, but you've got Ahmad Hardy, who had 1,350 yards as a freshman at ULM last year. That's a great pickup. And then Kevin Coleman comes over from Mississippi State, who was their one last year to lead that receiving corps. So it's going to be really interesting to see if this team adjusts to being a defensive-minded team. I think the defense is certainly going to lead the way. It's going to be the unit that's very much ahead of the offense to start the year. How long does it take the offense to get together? How long does it take them to gel? And does it really throw off the whole vibe that Drinkwitz had going to be a defensive-minded team versus an offensive team? I struggle to say that again because they had really good defenses, but I just feel like they were – when I think Mizzou, I do think offense over defense, and so that is going to be an adjustment for a lot of people inside and outside of that program.
Well, and it was a good adjustment that they made when Blake Baker leaves, right? He had that Mizzou defense humming. He gets poached by LSU. So Corey Batoon comes in, and they picked up right where they left off. Like I mentioned earlier, top 20 overall defense. I think what helps me believe that the offense can figure it out relatively quickly is, yes, there are new faces on the wide receiver side, but you've got returners like Joshua Manning, like their tight end's named Brett Norfleet comes back. And then Kevin Coleman Jr., who's also a St. Louis native. He's coming back he's coming back home. He's going to take over Luther Burden's spot in the slot. He's going to take over his jersey number. He's going to wear number 3. So I think this is going to be kind of a coronation for Kevin Coleman Jr., who had a great year at Mississippi State last year. I think his ceiling is even higher this year. And it's a grizzled offensive line. It's a nasty offensive line that's going to be in front of Ahmad Hardy and those backs and Prabula as he kind of warms up to being a starting quarterback. Ahmad Hardy, wasn't he the kid that committed to ULM specifically with the intent to go to the Power 4 level after 1 year at ULM?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
He said, I think maybe even on signing day that
he did.
he was already looking forward to his transfer portal opportunities, which, you know what? The dude bet on himself and he
paid off.
Well, yeah, it worked. And this will be a copy paste take for me a couple of times tonight, but this whole thing is just going to depend on how well those offensive pieces gel, right? Trey, you kind of mentioned it. The good news though for them is it's a soft start to the schedule up until it's not. They get Central Arkansas, Kansas, and Louisiana. That gives you 3 weeks to figure it out, right? That's
offensive
3 weeks
to Kansas, sir. That's the border war.
It's going to be. I think that they're a much better team than Kansas. I think Kansas takes a step back, but that's just me. But then immediately you start SEC play with South Carolina. Yes, you get that game at home, and you're happy about that. You get a little drop off to UMass and a bye week before you then welcome Alabama here. So you don't take your first road trip until the middle of October. Kind of nice. It's going to be
October 18th is the first time they will leave Faurot Field.
And which is great when you're trying to break in that new offense, right? You get all those new offensive pieces. By the time they leave, they'll be 6 games into the season. So it's a softer start to the schedule in terms of just, I guess, opponent difficulty up until you hit those couple of SEC games. Couldn't have started with a couple of much harder teams to play in that first part of the SEC. But if you can get those games at home, show up to play, be ready, watch that defense with the crowd behind it, I think that they can maybe get a decent start. And even if you drop those 2 games, there's a lot of opportunities on the back part of that schedule to make some hay and find that schedule, right? We're looking at the over-under at 7.5. Feel pretty good about them hitting the over on that one. They may not be that good of a team, but the schedule really sets up well for them to win a lot of games this year, right? Like if they added a Texas or an LSU or, a couple of those in here, I may be a little less optimistic, but it's, I'm not necessarily hating on the schedule. I'm not necessarily hating on that. When you get an easy schedule, go make your money, go build your program. So I think this could be a pretty good year for Missouri.
Last thing I'll say about the Tigers, that secondary has a chance to be elite. I mean, we're talking about the defense being one of the best in the conference and could be up there in the top 2 or 3. I think the secondary's got the potential to be up there as well. Drayden Norwood is back. Toriano Pride Jr., who transferred over from Clemson last year, he's back. Jalen Catalon is at safety. Marvin Burks Jr. is at safety. It's a who's who. Dylan Carnell is their star. I mean, it's a loaded defense, and we've just been singing their praises this whole preview. It is kind of funky to think about them as a defense first team, but quite honestly, if they could win a few more of those nail biters, I think that would go a long way for Missouri's playoff chances. And I'm not necessarily projecting them to be a playoff team this year, but for me, that's what's lacked at times. Like LSU, when they came calling a couple of years ago, just get like 1 or 2 stops and you beat the Bayou Bengals at home. If they could get consistent on that side of the ball and be able to rely on them in key moments that determine whether or not they make the field or not, that's where I think Missouri starts to become more than just a fun team, but a real legitimate title contender.
Well, I'll push back on that just a little bit. They're actually last 2 seasons 10-1 in those close games. That has been what separated. I think you mean more like nail biters, like shootout type games, where they just need to step up and get a shot.
Correct.
Stop.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. When the defense has remained in control of the game, that's been when Mizzou has been at their best, when they're not trying to just find that one stop or find that solution because the other offense is just getting away with murder over there. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, like this team a lot. I think they're really underrated. Johnny Walker is the other name that we haven't mentioned yet. He left he's gone, 9.5 sacks last year, so they are going to have to find a way to replace that. Don't know if we mentioned Zion Young yet, if you mentioned him, Mitch, off the top, but yeah, that's going to be a really fun edge piece to watch as he grows into a full-time starting role. But yeah, 6 home games to open the year. Never seen that before. Only 4 true road games. Those true road games are at Auburn, at Vanderbilt, and at Oklahoma and at Arkansas to close the year. I'm not automatically picking against them in any of those 4 games. So to me, this I can get to 8-4, 9-3 really easily, and that just means you're a couple bounces of the ball away from another 10-win season. So they've never had 3 10-win seasons in a row. So that would be a huge milestone for the program.
Never would have guessed that Eli Drinkwitz would have gotten Missouri to where they are now with just, as strangely as that tenure started and some of the recruiting antics that they pulled. But he's done a job. He has a brand. He has a pitch. He has a style. And I mean, tip of the cap for him committing to that. Last thing, yes, Zion Young and Damon Wilson Jr., who transfers over from Georgia, hell on wheels off the edge. This Missouri defense is going to be just so much fun to watch.
Let's transition over to the other side of a rivalry game that involves Mizzou. The Arkansas Razorbacks. We'll talk Arizona next week on Big 12, but the Arkansas Razorbacks, 7-6 last year, 3-5 in league play. Sam Pittman has really had an up and down tenure, hasn't he? He's had some high highs, but the lows have been really low. And then he's had a couple years just like last year where they're kind of hovering around 500, find a way to make a bowl, and do make some noise into that bowl for their credit. But he saved his job last year. He's still on the hot seat going into this year, and he has a lot of unknowns, guys, on both sides of the football. The one place that he doesn't have an unknown, I think, is a quarterback position. I was really impressed with Taylon Green. I was kind of coming into my notes ready to really pick apart his game, but really, I think I just kind of stopped paying attention and tuned him out after the first 5 games of the year because his splits in those 2 are different. His first 4 Power 5 conference games, where he was his first SEC game and then taking on Oklahoma State in that as well, he was hovering around 50% completion, turned the ball over a ton, threw 5 interceptions in 4 games, and was just really not doing a good job of consistently moving the ball downfield. You remember they blew that lead against Oklahoma State partially because the offense started sputtering in the second half. So it was really a difficult start for him making that jump from Boise State. But then over the back half of the season, he really stepped up. He only had 1 game down the stretch where he was below 60% completion. I think it was against like Louisiana Tech or some other non-conference opponent. So in conference games down the stretch, he really stepped up. Ended up having the second best passing season in Arkansas history from a yardage standpoint, behind only Ryan Mallett. That stat shocked me when I read it. But to his credit, he really turned it around over the back half of the season. Now, the rest of his offense, I don't know where the help is going to come from, guys. There's a lot of people that are high on this transfer class from what I've read. I don't know necessarily what they're looking at. I like the running back room. They lose Jaquindon Jackson, but Mike Washington from New Mexico State is a serviceable pickup there. The receiving room, though, I don't know where his weapons are going to come from. They lose just about everybody. They lose their top 7 pass catchers, 8 if you count Jaquindon Jackson. And they're replacing them with a lot of guys that, just like I was talking about with the Kentucky guys in the trenches, they just haven't proven it at this level of football. When your top guys are like the number 1 from Charlotte, who Omega Blake, I think he is a decent pickup. But, you know, when you're talking about the number 1 from Charlotte or the number 2 from another G5 team or something like that, just doesn't really instill a lot of confidence in me that you're going to be able to move the ball consistently and give your quarterback a lot of help.
Well, and you look at their production last year. Did you guys know that they finished with the 10th overall offense in the country in 2024? Because I was today years old a couple days ago when I was putting my notes together, but I that was the first time I was hearing that.
Yeah, and is that scoring or yardage?
I believe that's just total offense.
Total offense. Okay. And, you know, it's hard for me to look at that because they did have a game against Arkansas Pine Bluff to open the year where they scored 70, right? They had some good other moments against the non-conference slate, but yeah, I mean, it was a really streaky offense. I think I wrote in the preview that if you take out the Arkansas Pine Bluff game and then like Mississippi State where they put up 58, they plummet down the rankings. So It was a streaky offense that really capitalized on some weaker opponents. But again, yards are yards and points are points. So at the end of the year, they are right up there.
To your point, I am curious to know what Petrino and Green cook up without the guys like Isaac Tesla, like the tight end room that they relied on so heavily last year. It just is. It's a bunch of new faces. Cam Shanks comes in from UAB. They get a guy, I think Isaac Sissy from Stanford, and then their new, projected starting tight end is from Montana State. all could be very good players, but to do it in the SEC is going to be a step up in competition. And I think you're right. I think Green deserves maybe more of the benefit of the doubt, certainly than what we were giving him last year. We were hard on the kid last year. We were not sure that Bobby Petrino and Green were necessarily going to gel, given some of the struggles that the offensive line had had. We wondered if Sam Pittman would be gone halfway through the year, especially once they fell apart in that Oklahoma State game, much to my Twitter chagrin. But they did. I mean, they found a way to get over the line and push it all the way to the finish. I'm just not sure what I can rely on with this team. The linebackers are going to be the strength of the defense. Pass rush and safety depth are concerns, big question marks for me. The pass defense was bad. They were 110th in the country last year. You could get pretty much whatever you wanted through the air against them, unless you were our team, and then it came down to the wire. I don't know. I think there's a lot of potential, but I feel like I'm not the only one that sits here and is going to say that I'm just out on Sam Pittman. I think he's reached his potential at Arkansas. I think that's run its course. He's a good coach. Arkansas needs a great coach to compete in the SEC with as loaded as the conference is, with as many recruiting battles that they have to share with bigger and better programs. Pittman is kind of the poor man's Ed O, to be quite honest to me. And that's not, I don't mean that to be offensive to Sam Pittman. He's been a very solid coach, offensive line coach, especially throughout his career. But Arkansas needs the white monster to get them over the edge. And I'm just, Pittman might be that morning cup of tea.
Yeah, I got a question on this one. Do you guys think that Sam Pittman's the head coach on October 1st? Because they start the schedule with Alabama A&M and Arkansas State. Then they go at Ole Miss, at Memphis, and then Notre Dame at home. There's a good chance he's coming off a 3-game losing streak there going into that bye week. And that bye week might be a good time to change the guard if you're the Arkansas Brass. I'm not saying that he should get fired, but I don't think he makes it out of the season. I think there's a good chance that his job is over pretty quick. And a lot of it has to do with the stuff you've been talking about. There's no supporting cast. Some of Taylon's Green game, by the way, it kind of was chuck it up there and let's see somebody come down with it. There's a little bit of that in his game. It's not like he's a bad quarterback, but there is some of that. You'd flip on the Arkansas game and you'd have it in the quad box, and then you just see a ball up in the sky and you're like, oh boy, they're doing it again. There's a little bit of chuck it up in the air for him. So I'm not out on Taylon Green as a passer. I think he's a good player. There's just nothing on that offense to help him out. And if that's the case, I don't see him winning at Ole Miss. I don't see him winning at Memphis, and they definitely ain't beating Notre Dame.
Yeah, that Memphis game would terrify me as an Arkansas fan, knowing I know they did retool the secondary, right? You mentioned their struggles last year, Mitch. They were dead last in the SEC in pass yards allowed per game. And they retooled. They brought in a lot of guys to try to fix that. But I'd be terrified of a Memphis offense on the road. And then that Arkansas State game in Little Rock, it's the first time those two programs are ever playing. And you don't think that a team that won 8 wins, a team that had 8 wins a year ago is going to be champing at the bit to knock off the big brother team in the state. So I'm not picking Arkansas State in that game, but it's not one that the Razorbacks can sleep on as they're still trying to figure things out. And then, after that, as if that run wasn't enough, they go to Tennessee. They host A&M and Auburn. I think that's an opportunity for some momentum if they've already made a coaching change, like you said, Garrett, or if they're trying to save Sam Pittman's job. But this is going to come down, guys, to beating teams, getting back to a bowl. I wrote this in our preview article. Getting back to a bowl is going to come down to beating teams at home that have just dominated Arkansas over the past decade or so. They're going to have to beat a Texas A&M team that is 12-1 since they joined the SEC against them. They're going to have to beat an Auburn team that they haven't beaten in Fayetteville since 2015. They're going to have to beat a Mizzou team that's 9-2 against them since 2014. It's just they've got to really buck some trends if they're going to save Sam Pittman's job and get back to a bowl game this year. It's
tough. It's another team that's sledding uphill. I do think we're on job watch for sure. There in Fayetteville, but if they can get the right person in the seat, I think Arkansas would be a really fun job to have.
Yeah, Arkansas truly is a coach away. Their fan base gets behind their sports. When you think like baseball and even recently like basketball, their fan base will get behind their sports. It's a fantastic fan base. Just get the right guy in the seat, and you're going to have some success with Arkansas football going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's go to another embattled coach for other reasons. Hugh Freeze at Auburn, entering year 3, and boy, has it been a ride his first couple of years. You look at year 1, squeak into a bowl game, but it included a loss to New Mexico State and giving up a 4th and, 31 in the Iron Bowl. 4th and Mill Road into the corner in the Iron Bowl, just to lose to Nick Saban one last time. Then last year, it was just, if it wasn't one thing, it was another. A 5-7 season, 2-6, really plagued by poor, inconsistent quarterback play. Peyton Thorne certainly had some moments, but to not take advantage of the receiving core that he had last year fully just was an indictment on him, and an indictment on how that offense was unfolding under Hugh Freeze. Now they're going to go all in on Jackson Arnold. Jackson Arnold comes down from Oklahoma, the former 5-star. He was the number 4 ranked quarterback in his recruiting class behind such talents as Arch Manning, Dante Moore, and I can't remember who else was at the top of that list off the top of my head, but he had some dudes that he was right behind, and he was right up there, considered one of the best, right up there with him. But he had a really rough debut at Oklahoma last year. Not all of that was his fault. I think the coaching staff really did him dirty by the way they handled his playing time, not letting him work through some stuff with receiver injuries and offensive line turmoil. But it's an interesting bet, to say the least. I think it's a very interesting bet for Hugh Freeze. Talented kid for sure, but the hopes of the program and the hopes of, honestly, Hugh Freeze's job are going to rest on his shoulders this year. Now, he will not have the problem that he had last year at Oklahoma, which is who the heck is he throwing the ball to? He will have probably the best wide receiver core in the entire conference. 2 freshman phenoms last year, 5-star Cam Coleman and Malcolm Simmons. My bad. They get Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech as well, coming down, who led the Yellow Jackets in the receiving last year. It's going to be a completely different world for Jackson Arnold, and we're going to really see, it's the age-old adage, do you need a receiver to make the quarterback, or does the quarterback make the receiver? And it's going to be fascinating to see for Auburn.
Horatio Fields joins from Wake Forest as well. He's a guy that I think a lot of people are going to start to learn who his name is after getting out of a Wake Forest program that struggled on offense. You're right. I mean, I was making the case for Jackson Arnold, a kid that I covered some of his games in high school. And, I was very frank that I did not love what I saw from Arnold last year at Oklahoma. But all that being said, I'm not saying that he can't improve. He is very talented. He's obviously got a cannon for an arm. And there's a reason why he was so highly coveted coming out of high school. Now, as Twitter tried to tell me, I clearly did not watch his games if I thought that Jackson Arnold was anything more than spare parts. Covering the games and watching every single Oklahoma Sooner ball game last year shut that fan up pretty quickly. But what I do worry about with Arnold is not his arm talent or his mobility or his skill at moving in and out of the pocket. What I am worried about is the speed of the game, because that's what ultimately got him benched in Norman last year. When Brent Venables, and he said this in a press conference, noticed that Arnold was changing the play at the line of scrimmage into a read that was objectively incorrect. That was when he knew, okay, this game is too fast for him. He does not know how to handle the pressure. And on that play specifically, Oklahoma is on the goal line trying to score. And I can't remember if Arnold throws an interception or if he fumbles it away. But it was essentially a comedy of errors. That's what Arnold has to prove that he can overcome this year on the Plains. Because if he can, the offensive line is much better at Auburn. They're returning some productive starters from last year. The wide receiving core is absolutely disgusting, and he's going to have every chance at throwing to wide open receivers at any part of the field. But if the game still remains too quick for him, and if Hugh Freeze cannot help him take that next step in his development, this is an Auburn team that's going to miss another bowl game, because without a competent QB1, and maybe you think Deuce Knight is the second coming. He's probably going to be the backup 5-star freshman who originally thought he was starting when he committed to Auburn. But without a competent quarterback, this offense is going to be a Ferrari in a trailer park. And that's what makes me most nervous about believing in the Tigers this season.
Yeah, I think there's a chance that this could end up looking a lot more like the Kyle McCord situation. And I'm not just saying that because the jersey colors are kind of the perfect match here, but I think this change of scenery to a team that I think better fits him and better suits him, I think could do a lot of good for Jackson Arnold. Obviously, like you guys have said, like the receiver core is just nightmare fuel at this point, right? It's I don't want to be the defensive coordinator trying to figure out how to stop Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton and all those guys. Like it's going to be disgusting. It's all going to depend on how he adjusts to that. I'm not saying that he's going to have a prolific year like Kyle McCord did last year, but obviously, it wasn't a good situation at maybe a better team, better program at the time. And then he switched position, he goes over to a different school and gets, a little bit of a better fit for him, and it worked out. It might end up working out that way. And by the way, I think it's going to look the same way too, because Oklahoma got themselves a quarterback who probably suits them better as well. We can talk about them a little bit later, but I'm hoping for the kid's sake that he can figure it out, because I don't think that they're going to wait too long with Deuce Knight sitting on the bench. I think if he doesn't figure it out, you're going to see Deuce come in pretty quick and take over that offense. I don't think it's a thing where for Auburn fans, they're going to want to sit around and watch bad quarterback play again. I think they're going to be looking for any way to find good quarterback play at Auburn. And I think they have somebody on that campus who can do it, right? Between the two of those guys, one of those guys I think can, push the offense and find a way to score points. And Auburn fans are going to be, absolutely chomping at the bit to try to find a way to make that happen too. So I hope for his sake that it's a little bit more of a Kyle McCord situation where he can kind of find his footing, but that's kind of my big wild card with Auburn. And the only reason I'm not willing to go any higher with Auburn this offseason is just because I can't confidently say that they're not going to drop a game that they probably should win early on in the season. They got a tricky start to the season as well. It's not necessarily like murderer's row, but it's a couple of tricky games in that first month of the season.
Yeah, I'll get to the schedule in just a second, because you're absolutely right, Garrett. But one other thing that I think he'll have as advantage over Oklahoma is the offensive line. All 5 starters coming back this year. It could be one of the better units in the entire SEC. And he's going away from an offensive line that couldn't rush for 4 yards a carry last year and gave up 50 sacks against I have a fun stat about that when we get to Oklahoma in just a second. Not fun for Sooner fans, but fun for everyone else. We haven't talked about the defense yet, guys. And for as much inconsistency as the offense has had the first couple of years under Hugh Freeze, the defense has actually been pretty solid. It's been something that they could rely on. They've kind of uglied up some games that they really didn't have business being close in. And the defense has delivered some big moments over the first couple of years of the Hugh Freeze era. It's a little bit of a question mark this year, especially up front in the front 7. They have 1 starter back on the defensive line. Again, another team that's relying on some just lower level guys to make a jump up to the SEC. The linebacker core, they brought in some nice transfers there, but it's really young outside of just a couple guys. So the depth is a question mark there. Can the defense be relied on? Even if the offense does figure it out, is the defense going to be able to stop enough people to actually transition these games from losses to wins?
They could be a little small on the defensive line, which is certainly a concern. That one starter is Keldrick Falk coming back off the edge. I like him. They should be fierce off the edge, but when it comes to the SEC and trying to win in the trenches, size does matter. And that's why Florida had a 450-pound defensive tackle on their roster, right? Like sometimes you just got to be bigger than the other guy. The linebackers are talented. They're new to the program. I like Caleb Wheaton, who transfers in. The secondary is probably the strength of the team. They've got 4 or 5 starters coming back this season. So, yeah, I think they're going to have to show me that they can get off after the passer early on in the season. I mean, that's going to be the only way that they survive this stretch. I don't know if you want to go into that stretch right now, but it's tough. The first half of the season is probably as brutal as there is any in the country. Second half maybe gets a little bit easier, but it's not a comfy start for the Tigers.
Yeah, they're kind of the anti-Mizzou, right? Mizzou's starting with 6 home games. Auburn's going to hit the road 3 out of the first 5 weeks of the season, and it's not easy at all. The game that Garrett was teasing was the opener at Baylor on a Friday night in Waco. I'm fascinated by that game because I think the winner is really positioning themselves well for the rest of the season. The loser is going to have a lot of questions to answer coming out of that one. They have a couple of cupcakes to host at home, then back-to-back road games at Oklahoma and at Texas A&M. A&M's already confirmed to be a night game. Oklahoma has that as a window option. That's a rough start. And if you're sitting there at 2-3 going into the bye week, there's just going to be a lot of questions about Jackson Arnold. There's going to be a lot of calls for the backup. And then you have Georgia waiting on the other side of the bye week. So, yeah, you're right. The back half is a lot more manageable. Mizzou at Arkansas, Kentucky at Vanderbilt before Mercer and the Iron Bowl. But that first start, like what do we need to see from Hugh Freeze and see from Jackson Arnold record-wise to buy Auburn for the rest of the season after those first 5 games? Is winning one of those road games enough to give you confidence for the rest of the year? Do they need to find a way to win 2 out of 3?
They got to win 2 out of 3 for me. I don't think you can, because, I mean, look, the situation if you're winning 1 out of those 3 is you either win in Waco, but then you lose your first 2 SEC games, or you're going 1-1 in the SEC, but you drop to Baylor to start the year, and you're probably asking a whole lot of questions about, like, okay, are we finally getting it right? It's going to be a lot of turmoil in that locker room, like you were saying, right before, again, Georgia on the other side of the bye week. It's like, oh, thanks, we get a bye week, and then we get to go play the Georgia Bulldogs. So it's just a really – it's not a position that I'd want to be in if I'm Hugh Freeze. Like, I don't want to be the guy making those calls right now, but it's yeah, I think you got to win 2 of those 3 if you're going to feel confident, because there's just too many opportunities to stumble on the back part of that schedule.
Well, I think so. The over/under for this seems shockingly high to me, guys.
7.5 was shocking to me too.
And the over is getting the majority of the bet. So listen, I talk with Auburn fans. Jake Crane, good friend of the show, last year told me to take the over. I think it was 6.5. They didn't even get close to doing that. So Auburn fans are very much like Aggies, where we go through the cycle of abuse, and every year we swear them off by December. And then, we get to the dog days of summer and we're talking ourselves into 8-9 wins. I think that's happening on the Plains. I do think if they win one of those 3, Baylor, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, you're fine. You should go to a bowl game, even if you only go 1-2 in that stretch. Based off of my guesses, that gets you to 6-6. If you go 2-3, suddenly I feel like we're actually projecting Auburn to be much better than maybe what we're talking about them right now. Because if you are beating Baylor and Oklahoma, or Baylor and Texas A&M on the road, those are going to be tough environments at the beginning of the season when you are for sure getting a team's best shot. And I think that will tell us a lot about Jackson Arnold's ability to slow the game down, for that defense to step up and stop some retooled, some revamped offenses on the road. So I'm not maybe as jumping to conclusions based off of those first 3 true tests as maybe what you guys are, but no doubt it would save Hugh Freeze and the message boards a lot of angst if they could find a way to win 2 of 3.
Last thing I'll say here is it's just always hard to assume more than a 1 or 2 game improvement, right? Hitting this over means winning 8 games, and not a lot of teams go from 5 wins to 8 wins in just 1 year. There's usually an in-between year there that gets them there. So yeah, it's going to be a difficult over to hit. I think if Jackson Arnold does click with those receivers though, and it was an Oklahoma problem or just a system injury revolving door offensive line problem in Oklahoma, then yeah, this could be a dark horse contender for the SEC title. But so much remains to be seen. I love that we'll find out a lot about this Auburn team before the calendar turns to October. Let's turn over to another fascinating team, and that's the Ole Miss Rebels this year. Back-to-back 10-plus win seasons. They go 10-3 last year. Threw a fit that they should have been in the playoff, but to that I say don't lose to Kentucky and be their only SEC win, Lane Kiffin. He is betting on Austin Simmons. And this is, a portal king, self-described and backed up by the results and the recruiting rankings out of the portal, that could have gotten almost anybody from the quarterbacks out of the portal. Like if you're an Ole Miss and you're Lane Kiffin and you're offering one of these guys in the portal to come be your quarterback, they're probably going to say yes if you live up to the NIL expectations. But Lane Kiffin is banking on Austin Simmons, and I think that says a lot about what he sees in him. We got to see him a little bit last year when he came in for Jackson Dart when he was hurt in the Georgia game. He led a scoring drive in that one, looked really comfortable. But outside of Austin Simmons, there's who's an unknown commodity in himself. We haven't seen him consistently enough to know what he's going to be at the quarterback position. There's a ton of turnover on this offense. So running backs and wide receivers are seeing a lot of turnover. The offensive line saw a lot of churning last year. They're going to be all new this year. And to me, guys, this is my maybe hot take about Ole Miss. I think I'm out on a 10-plus win season. I think I'm out as a playoff contender. Obviously, the Jimmies and Joes are out if they're ranking them. What is this, 10th? I've lost track of where we're at on the numbers, but I think 10th or 11th here. I'm out on Ole Miss, and I think let me preface this by saying I don't think they're going to have a Florida State-like fall off last year. They're not going 2-10. But every single one of these teams we've seen rely heavily on the portal has had a down year at some point where they just miss on evaluations. And if you look at the numbers, if you look at the recruiting class in the portal on 247, it's down a little bit on the average talent evaluation. That's not everything, obviously, but it feels maybe a little bit more like their lofty ranking this year is maybe based a little bit more on quantity and not quality. There's not the Walter Nolan coming over from Texas A&M. There's not the just depth of stars that they've been able to add the last couple of years and ride that to 10 wins. Tell me where I'm wrong if I'm crazy, but I'm expecting a little bit of drop off from Ole Miss this year.
The schedule is interesting because you look at it on paper and it's not, something that Mississippi State or Kentucky is staring in the face. But LSU at the end of September, they go to Georgia and Oklahoma in back-to-back weeks, October 18th and October 25th. They host South Carolina, and then they host Florida in the middle of November. It's easy, I think, to consider at least 3 of those games toss-ups. And I think your point about the portal is well taken. I do have some more questions this year about the defense than I did maybe the last 2 years, right? And this was a team in Ole Miss that just won by shootouts, right? I mean, the portal has been very kind to the Rebels and how they've been able to build a defense, especially on that back end. Pete Golding may be up against it this year in that he's got some talented pieces. Jalen Braxton's in the secondary. Sage Ryan's an LSU transfer at safety. But I just don't know how they're going to fit together, right? And I mean, it's same song, different verse. You can say that about a number of teams on this preview sheet. Austin Simmons, though, is interesting because he's 19 years old. He's already secured his undergraduate degree. He's obviously an incredibly cerebral player, former homeschool athlete. Shout out my fellow brethren, and has received comparisons to, if you guys are familiar with Todd Marinovich from yesteryear, Sports Illustrated once called him America's test tube athlete, right? Where he was literally groomed by an overbearing dad to be this professional athlete. Everything he did was with his vision set on becoming the best athlete possible. And he didn't end up panning out, right? He flames out, doesn't end up having any sort of success at the pro level. And so Kiffin, I read an article by The Athletic that did a profile on him. Kiffin used that comparison to complement the structure that Simmons grew up with his family, with his father specifically, and with his dedication to the regiment. And so when you combine that with 6'5" and just a bruiser on the ground, a cannon for an arm, there's a lot of reason to believe that this kid could be the future at quarterback for Ole Miss. We saw him sparingly last year, came in and saved that drive against Georgia and ended up scoring a touchdown en route to that upset when Jackson Dart turned his ankle. How quickly does he ascend to the throne and become the next guy down there in the Grove? That's probably my biggest question. Took Jackson Dart just a little bit, right? We had questions about him even into last year about whether or not he was truly everything that he was kind of being marketed as, and obviously finished pretty strongly and is now a New York Giant after being drafted in the first round. High expectations, a high octane offense that's going to want to go fast, and the weight of these playoff goals. That's a lot for a 19-year-old to handle.
Yeah, I think the good news, if you're an Ole Miss fan, is that the proof of concept for this offense works. Obviously, we know Lane Kiffin can run his offensive system. Even with a whole lot of new pieces, I think there's a lot of confidence that can still work, even if it's not as prolific as it's been in previous years, right? I think if you're an Ole Miss fan and you're going to be completely honest with yourself, you got to be a little concerned on the defensive side of the ball, specifically on that line of scrimmage. I'm a little concerned with the defensive line, and it seemed like, man, Lane Kiffin would just go to the portal and get his guys, and every guy on that defensive line was a home run. You're replacing a lot of those guys. That's a lot of home runs to try to replace on that defensive line. He might have done it with some of them. I just don't know if that level of success through the portal can, continue at the level that he's been having, right? For me, Ole Miss kind of feels like they're at a crossroads. We've seen Ole Miss ascend a little bit, and it kind of feels like this might be the year where they kind of take a step back, and I don't know if it's a stall out and we're just going to say, okay, well, that's as good as Ole Miss can be, or if this is just kind of a step back and reload and we'll see you again next year. And by a step back, I do mean something more like 8 or 9 wins as opposed to 5 or 6 wins. I don't think that's probably in the cards for Ole Miss this season. But if they are, an 8-4, 9-3 type of team this year, I think that's where you have to start asking questions about the program and saying, okay, well, what are we going to do to really fix this? Can we go and find our guys in the portal, or is this just kind of a 1 year down type of thing? When you're Ole Miss and your down year is 8-4, 9-3, like I probably think they probably go this year, that's a good spot. It's a good spot to be in if that's your program. But I know a lot of Ole Miss fans want to find a way to climb to the top of the mountain. I wonder if they have that ultimately. Don't think we see it this year. I don't think we get to see this year if they are ultimately championship pedigree type of program. But this is a big year for me to kind of see what they're made of. And I think that's what I'm really looking for is they're going to win a bunch of games. They're going to be a really good team. They could upset a top team at any point. But I really want to see what they're made out of. I really want to see how much better they can be than maybe, the sum of the parts at the moment are. See if that system can kind of keep going and we can keep our eyes forward to future years as well.
Well, you guys have hinted at it on defense. I think that's where the biggest concerns are for me. Defense in the wide receiver room are the biggest concerns for me. Lots of turnover on the defensive line. They lost pretty much everybody from the defensive line that led the SEC in sacks last year. I think even led the nation in sacks, if I'm remembering that correctly. No returning starters in the secondary. Linebacker core actually looks pretty good. They landed some solid transfers there. They actually landed 4 guys that had 88 or more tackles last year for the linebacker core. So that's going to anchor the defense. But outside of that, I'm a little concerned. We might be running into some shootouts, and anything can happen when you're not confident that your defense can stop the other team. But I think you guys are right in the actual floor of this team. Like I said off the top, I'm not projecting a Florida State type fall off. That was obviously a 1 in a million shot that happened last year. But the schedule does lend itself to build up a lot of wins, especially early. They opened Georgia State at Kentucky, Arkansas, Tulane. Not projecting a loss in any of those. But then after that, they do have LSU, road trips to Georgia and Oklahoma, and South Carolina and Florida at home. Those are all really difficult games that I could see them struggling in, especially if they can't rely on their defense to put pressure on the opposing quarterback like they have in the past. So out on Ole Miss as a championship contender. I think they're solidly in a bowl, not taking too much of a step back, but they'll try to reload again in the portal next year. Most likely. I don't want to write them off in July, but here we are. It's got to make some calls at some point. Let's move on to Texas A&M, our team. Guys, this is we love this time of year every year in Aggieland because we haven't lost a game yet. And the sarcastic salutes and giggums are all around on the YouTube feed if you're not watching. It's a really interesting year one for Mike Elko. 8-5 is the final record, as the jokes write themselves, of Texas 8-4. Started 7-1 and 5-0 through a bunch of quarterback turmoil. They were changed starting quarterbacks twice. They started 5-0 in conference play, beat LSU at home, and were in control of their own destiny to make it to Atlanta even all the way to the last week of the season. But as it's way too often been the case under previous coaches, it was a 1-4 finish. The one win was against New Mexico State. It was 0-4 against power conference opponents to close the year. And we go into the offseason wondering which A&M team was real. Was it the first 8 weeks of the season, or was it the last 5 games of the season? A lot of that had to do with the injuries. The running back room got decimated with injuries. Ruben Owens before the start of the season, Le'Veon Moss in the South Carolina game. That slide really coincided with Le'Veon Moss going down and some other injuries at other key spots. But you're looking forward to this year. The confidence is coming from that running back core coming back together. I really do think this could be right up there behind Penn State as one of the best running back cores in the entire nation. I don't think they're going to pass up the guys in Happy Valley, but Lev Moss, Amari Daniels, and Ruben Owens, and apparently EJ Smith is back. I was not expecting to read that. I'm not sure how he still has eligibility. I think he was playing when I was still in college, but EJ Smith is back too to be running back number 4. Good for him. That's where that and the offensive line are where you're banking on for A&M. Now, at the other 2 key positions on offense, at quarterback and receiver, Marcel Reed getting a full offseason as the guy. He was kind of will they, won't they for a good portion of last year. And they went out and made some nice moves in the portal to get him some weapons. Casey Concepcion, who had a fantastic freshman year in NC State a couple years ago, dealt with some injuries last year. Mario Craver from Mississippi State is a guy that is really shifty and can get some separation, something they desperately needed last year in that receiving core. It's going to be an interesting offense, and I think it will feel like a make or break year for Colin Klein on that side of the ball. Before we get over to the defense, who has some legit questions as well, is this an offense you see improving and being more consistent this year with the additions they made?
I don't see how it's not. We were surprised at the lack of continuity at times in the passing game last year with Colin Klein. And I mean, how many texts did we send to each other? If he runs inside zone on 2nd and 10 one more time, something's going to get thrown into the wall. So it felt like a first date where there's a lot of positives and there's some things that you really like, but you're also stuck kind of rehashing that joke that you told that didn't land. And maybe she had something in her teeth for the second half of the night. And you're just like, can I get over that? For me, I do expect it to improve. Marcel Reed is an excellent athlete with a good enough arm. And at his best, he's a guy that can matriculate an offense and go win 9-10 games by putting up 35 points a game at his best. The footwork has got to get better. We saw him tipping pitches at times last season. His struggle with hitting the deep ball was apparent. But then he would have a game like the USC game. The kid did everything he needed to do to win that ball game for the Aggies, and the defense let him down. And so I feel like being QB1 comes with a scrutiny that not many other positions get. And once Le'Veon Moss did go down and it was Amari Daniels and EJ Smith at running back, you lost the better half of your offense. Not to mention your wide receiver core couldn't get separation if their life depended on it last year. So you upgrade athletically. Terry Bussey should have a much bigger role in the offense this year. 5-star athlete who played corner and wide receiver and wildcat and all different manner of positions last year. A&M is not going to have a speed problem this year. They've got some track stars out wide. For me, it feels like now Colin Klein has the tools to do some fun things and bring some wrinkles to the offense on top of having all 5 starters along the offensive line back.
Is it more like dating the chick from Seinfeld that looks really good in the good lighting, but then when the shadows hit, she's scary?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
maybe.
Elite pull from Trey there. No, I am not really concerned about the offense. I'd like to remind everybody that this was the #1 scoring offense in SEC play. That's the fact. You can go look it up. If you just count SEC games, Texas A&M was #1 in scoring.
Shocking stats that I refuse to believe, even though they are on the internet.
It is objectively true, even though it feels weird. And I think a lot of it just comes down to the fact that there were moments where this offense looked amazing, and there were moments where this offense just looked like it couldn't get out of its own way. A lot of it, though, I think hinges on, and we've talked about Marcel a little bit. I think Marcel's got a little bit more arm talent than he's getting a little bit credit for. You can go ask the people of Auburn if they like Marcel Reed very much, because he was kind of terrorizing them towards the end of the season as well, and was quite literally a dropped pass in the breadbasket away from putting that game on ice. And if that were the case, we would have seen him in Atlanta, and we'd be having a very different conversation about the Texas A&M Aggies in this offseason. So how close it was to being a special season versus ultimately not panning out, I think is a lot of reason to believe in this offense specifically, because a lot of the problems on the offense were sometimes there wasn't enough time for Marcel to figure stuff out and plant his feet and, find a guy downfield. Sometimes guys weren't getting any separation downfield. And sometimes there was a guy open that he maybe just missed, just didn't see him as he was trying to make his reads, maybe looking somewhere else. Game might have been a little complex for him at that point. You give me an offseason out, faster wide receivers, and an experienced offensive line, I don't think there's a lot of reasons to doubt this Texas A&M offense. For me, my questions come on the defensive side of the football, where if you're watching Texas A&M's meltdown following the LSU game, that was where the problems were. When you watch them walk into South Carolina and they couldn't stop anything to save their life, you watch, Lenora Sellers really have a coming out party in that game and taking the nation by storm, starting kind of then. I know he had been playing well, but that was kind of his first big moment where he had knocked off a bigger team. And then you go to Auburn and watch a previously not very good offense in Auburn suddenly look amazing. We're making Peyton Thorne look like he's Peyton Manning. And all of a sudden you're asking yourself a lot of questions about that defensive side of the football. If Mike Elko's truly running that defense, I feel a lot better about it, but that is a big question mark for me right now.
Well, you mentioned Mike Elko allegedly taking over the defense, and that's something that he was very vocal about at the end of the bowl game. He was very heated in that Las Vegas Bowl post-game presser that is not up to the standard that he expected. Kept defensive coordinator Jay Bateman on the staff, did bring in a co-DC, but apparently it's all going to be more on Elko, and we've seen that work at Texas A&M before. Jimbo Fisher's best teams in College Station were called and coordinated on the defensive side of the ball by Mike Elko. Defense is really interesting to me because you look at it, some of the numbers, especially in that win streak, that 7-game win streak that they had, were phenomenal. In the 5 SEC wins that they had, they allowed 73.8 yards per game on the ground. In the losses in November, they allowed 199.4. So it's very clear to see where the issues are. A lot of attention went to the pass defense, and the pass defense had a lot of holes in it at times last year, but the rush defense really failed them. The defensive line that was supposed to be the strength really failed them.
And a lot of it just, by the way, was tackling. Like a lot of it was just guy in the open field, can't bring him down for some unexplainable reason. It was very bizarre to watch in real time.
28 missed tackles against South Carolina. 28.
They set records. 28 is unheard of, guys. That's insane. It's time for the next generation on that defensive line, though. Gone are Nick Scorton and the Shamars. It's going to be up to guys like Cassius Howell, who had a really great bowl game. DJ Hicks has been in the program for a couple years now on the inside. Rylan Kennedy flashed a little bit last year. Garrett, when we were at the Notre Dame game, said how much he liked what he was seeing from Rylan Kennedy. Marco Jones had a fantastic spring game. And the guys dude's just a freak. I watched him play baseball this spring in a scrimmage, and he just towers above even guys like Jay Slavalette, who just got drafted tonight. So time for a new generation. I really like the linebacker core. If we're looking for an identity on defense, Torian York and Scooby Williams are a really nice 1-2 at the linebacker position. And they've got some nice guys coming back in the back end. Will Lee is a really good corner to build around. Tons of pass breakups last year. Tyreek Chappelle coming back at the nickel spot. I think that's going to do wonders for that pass defense as he comes back with all the experience he brings. So Julian Humphrey from Georgia coming over, a guy that got some time as a starter over the last couple of years there. So lots of pieces. It's just going to be interesting to see how Elko puts them together and plays chess on that side of the ball.
Well, and you didn't talk about, old man Albert Regis on the defensive line, but he's still there. And having experience and having some of that I've been here for a little while, get some of that grown man strength. We've seen that make a difference on defensive lines, for lots of teams in the SEC. But he's going to kind of be that anchor piece that a lot of guys are going to have to work around. You're mentioning all the new faces. You get one that's not going to fill you with loads of confidence, but I'd rather have a big guy in the middle I can kind of lean on and say, all right, let's let these other guys figure out how to scheme around it, kind of hold a little position. He's going to be a big key to this A&M defense and figuring out if they can actually, start stopping the run, winning at the point of attack a little bit.
Ags have got to get pressure off the edge, and Cassius Howell is going to be a big part of that. I think TJ Searcy from Florida is going to be a part of that. Samuel Mpimba, Deion Hayes, all guys that they brought in from the transfer portal to fill out that defensive line. Jordan Shaw is the one guy in the secondary you didn't mention, cover corner coming over from Washington. I think with Shaw and Lee, you've got your starting to cover corners. And then if Chappelle can play the nickel, that's where we've seen him blossom, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they kicked him out to the boundary when they needed to. But if he can play inside at that nickel spot, if Bryce Anderson can be healthy at the free safety, I love what Dalton Brooks is doing as kind of that hybrid, strong box safety kind of player. The Aggies, the potential for them to take that next step and win 9 games this season, I think is quite high. But, it's the same song that we sing every offseason. This roster passes the eye test. They've just got to go freaking do it.
And I think I'd be a lot more confident in them doing that if they had the same record but didn't collapse in November last year. Yeah. They found a way to beat South Carolina, Auburn, even if you lose to Texas, but maybe lost to Missouri and Arkansas or something like that. I think I'm a lot more confident if they're closing well. I keep going back to you guys. Maybe this is just battered Aggie syndrome. If you don't know what it is, look it up. It's hilarious. Maybe this is just battered Aggie syndrome, but I keep thinking this is a team that's going to look a lot better on the field and maybe play some closer games and play tougher, but maybe that doesn't translate in the win-loss column because all those games they had at home last year that we were pointing out, hey, their toughest games are at home, we flipped them to the road last year. They go to Notre Dame. They go to an LSU team that they haven't won at since 1994. They go to Missouri. They go to Texas. They played Arkansas for the first time since 2013 in a series that's always just stupidly close. So it's a tough schedule. And even 8-4 again might be improved over last year.
That's where I'm sitting this year is 8-4 and go win your bowl game and get to 9 wins. I think that's a frustrating spot on the treadmill, but 9-4 this season would feel, I think, a world away from what 8-5 did last year. If you close in November strong. I mean, if you can find a way to beat one of LSU or Missouri on the road, if you can beat South Carolina at home, which we've seen them do time and time again, even if you then lose to Texas in the finale in Austin, which you probably will, I think you have a lot more momentum going into the bowl game in the offseason, the recruiting class, than what we even got close to in 24.
I think you're going to learn a lot about this team when they play Notre Dame. They do have to go on the road. I'm not anticipating them to win that game, but I think the way that they play, the way that they stack up is going to tell you a lot about where this team's mentality is, a lot about where the skill is on this team. And, I mean, you never know. It's early. You could catch a young quarterback, if it's that kind of situation. It'll be the second game for Notre Dame, third game for A&M. I think if you ask me about A&M about 11 o'clock that Saturday night when we're talking about them in the recap live stream, I think I'll have a lot better idea of what this A&M team's going to be. I could see it gelling for this A&M team. I mean, we've seen Colin Klein offenses turn into, kind of powerhouse explosive offenses, and Elko can clearly run a defense. All you got to do is put it together, and that's been the difficult thing for A&M to do is just put it together, right? Get the entire thing working at the same time. Offense looks good. Defense looks good. Everything looks good at the same time. If they can do that and maybe start to string some stuff together, this team can achieve. They've got the talent. Again, put me in a little bit of the doubt category because we haven't seen it happen, but I do want to give a little bit of a carve out for benefit of the doubt for Mike Elko. This is only his second season. Mike Elko can't help the fact that Jimbo Fisher and Kevin Sumlin were guys that came before him. He can't help the fact that that's what happened. He can only be Mike Elko, right? And that's, I think, where I'm going to carve out a little benefit of the doubt and just say, hey, let's give him some time. We saw what he did at Duke. We saw what he was able to do, in his time as a head coach there. Give him a chance. Let's see what this team looks like middle to end of September.
All right. Any other A&M thoughts since it's our team? We're ready to move on.
Moving on.
Don't do it to
All
me
right.
again, Aggies. Come on.
They will. Don't worry. We'll be buying in, and then it'll come crashing down. Let's go to a former Big 12 rival of the Texas A&M Aggies, and that's the Oklahoma Sooners. Oklahoma comes into this year following a 6-7 debut in the SEC last year, 2-6 in league play. Tried to warn you, Oklahoma fans, going into the season. You told us time and time again that we were wrong, but sorry. I will confess, we did not see it happening in this way. It was kind of a Murphy's Law situation that got you to 6-7. We mentioned the wide receiver injuries and when we were talking about Jackson Arnold in the context of Auburn. This offensive line, guys, I teased the stat earlier. They gave up 50 sacks last year, sub 4 yards per carry. 24 of those sacks came in 3 games in a row against Texas, South Carolina, and Ole Miss. That was a 3-week stretch where the Oklahoma quarterbacks got sacked 24 times. All that's in the past, though. John Mateer is coming in. Ben Arbuckle is coming with him from Pullman, the offensive coordinator from Washington State last year. But let's talk about transfer. We kind of talked about John Mateer quite a bit this offseason. I think the college football populace is starting to wake up. We can talk about him a little bit more if you guys want. The transfer that I'm a little bit more excited about is Jaden Ott coming over from California. That is a really electric running back to pair with Javante Barnes. And the receiving corps brought in some interesting pieces as well. Isaiah Sategna from Arkansas, really the only proven SEC commodity there. It's another team that is kind of trying to get some guys from smaller schools to take a bigger role in the SEC. But bottom line on offense is it can't possibly be worse than what it was last year. They're bringing in too much talent. They're reinvigorating. And they've got Ben Arbuckle, who I think is one of the young stars at the offensive coordinator position.
Yeah, 113th in total offense last year, 119th in passing, barely inside the top 100 in scoring. It truly can't.
No wide receiver eclipsed 325 receiving yards last year.
I mean, that's
at Oklahoma. At Oklahoma.
Yeah. The land of plenty when it comes to distributing passes down the field. I'm very high on the Sooners this year. As much as we tried to warn you about the offensive line struggles last year, this year, and I wrote my notes, I believe in the continuity with LOL in parentheses. I like they have 3 returning starters coming back. Eddie Pierre-Louis is going to be their left guard. I like what the Sooners have in place. The question is, how quickly can that offense ascend to levels that we're used to seeing Oklahoma run with a brand new offensive coordinator, with so many new pieces in the backfield? I think they can do it relatively quickly. The X factor is going to be week 2 when Michigan comes calling. And I think that's, I think a lot of headlines are going to be written about that week 2 game. Someone's season is, receives the supercharge. Someone's season is over based on what the pundits are probably going to be saying. I like the defense. I think, yes, you lose some key pieces. Danny Stutzman's gone. They lose a safety to the NFL as well.
Billy Bowman, yeah.
Billy Bowman, Denton Ryan's own. But, a couple of very familiar faces back there in the secondary. They've got a number of returners along that defensive line. This is a really talented Oklahoma team. And the challenge was not the defense last year. The defense finished 29th in scoring, and that's really as high as it could have been. The offense let them out to dry so many times. So for me, the offense, if it just improves marginally, the defense doesn't take that big of a step back, I think this is going to look like a new team, truly a night and day difference, just, provided injuries don't ravage them once again.
Yeah, I think this team should look a lot better. I like the run game. I'm still kind of questioning the pass game, not from what Mateer can do, but more from the receivers' standpoint of just saying, like, who's going to be out there to be the guy to actually catch passes for him. Trey, you kind of highlighted the struggles there a little bit, but I'm optimistic overall. And I think, look, honestly, for Oklahoma fans, if I told you your offense was a little bit one-dimensional this year, I think a lot of y'all would say, hey, we got a dimension. We're at least doing one thing, right? We can at least run the football. I think the problem is the schedule really is going to be a tricky one for Oklahoma, where you could be a better team and it doesn't look that different in terms of the final result. Obviously, kind of, Mitch, you talked about it, Michigan coming to town. That's going to be a huge one. You also, you play Texas. That's a common thing. At South Carolina is tough. At Tennessee is tough. At Bama is tough. Home games against Ole Miss, LSU, Missouri, depending on what you think of them. Going to be some tough games on the schedule. So, although I don't think that Oklahoma is going to be nearly as bad as they were last season, I think you could still see a couple more losses than you expect from an Oklahoma team, even if they do look a lot better in terms of the product they put on the field.
Feels like a team that maybe has one of the higher ceilings if everything hits. If the defense doesn't take too far of a step back, if John Mateer comes in, finds a go-to receiver, some more guys step up behind Satania, I think this could have one of the higher ceilings, and they could be pushing for 9 or 10 wins. Feels like 7-5, 8-4 with the schedule, though. It feels like they're gonna.
That's the most positive thing you said about Oklahoma all offseason.
I think it's the most positive thing I've ever said about Oklahoma on the show. I'm not a big fan of the Sooners in general, but I do like this team this year. I love John Mateer. I think that he's going to be just a revelation. And I think they're going to have competency at the offensive play caller position too. And that can't be overstated. Difficult schedule. Like you guys highlighted, a lot's going to come down to that Michigan game, like Mitch said. But I think this is a team that can really see a big improvement this year and see a big jump just from competency on both sides of the football. Let's go to our last team in this episode. We'll have 6 on the next one that comes out Friday, but the last one we're going to talk about here, number 7 on the countdown, the Tennessee Volunteers made the playoff last year. Allegedly, I think they showed up. Their team was there. Their fans were there for sure, calling it Neyland North, but I don't think the team actually made it to Columbus. 10-3, 6-2 in league play, and we're the center of all the offensive offseason drama. The biggest story of the offseason, arguably, was Nico Iamaleava leaving Tennessee over an NIL dispute on the eve of the spring game. He enrolls at UCLA, and Tennessee and UCLA just kind of do a little switcheroo. Joey Aguilar, who originally was committed to UCLA out of the transfer portal from App State, is going to now be the starting quarterback at Tennessee. I think he's a fine replacement. I think that we've highlighted him on this show before, that he can make some big plays with his arm and his legs. He needs to take care of the football. He's really haphazard with it at App State. 24 interceptions and 24 starts over the last 2 years. That's not going to cut it for Tennessee this year. Dylan Sampson's gone, SEC's Offensive Player of the Year. They're going to have to find some juice at the running back position. Deshaun Bishop looks like he's going to be the guy. Had 6.1 yards per carry last year. Star Thomas had 800 yards at Duke. He's transferring in too. They didn't really have a star portal addition at the wide receiver position. They lost a lot of talent there as well. But they're just kind of rolling with the next generation. It's time for some of their star recruits from the last few years to step up. So offensively, it's hard to say that they're going to take a step back because the offense really wasn't that great consistently last year. They beat up on really bad teams, but anytime they played a defense with a pulse, it was kind of, hey, Dylan Sampson, run for a bunch of yards, and we'll try to put 24 points on the board so we can win with our defense. So I'm not really expecting a big jump back on offense, but defensively, they lost a ton of talent on the defensive line, including James Pierce. Their linebacker core is kind of intact, but they're also going to try to piece together some things and rely on a couple guys coming back from injury in the secondary. This was a defense-first team last year under Josh Heupel. Can they be a defense-first team again this year?
I actually am buying the defense again this year. I love what they have in the secondary. I think there's a lot of talent. Jermon McCoy was a guy that we hoped would come to Aggieland when he transferred from Oregon State, a Houston area kid. Goes to Rocky Top, had a really good season last year. The safeties, we'll see what they're like in the very back end. You're right. They do have to get after the passer along that defensive line. I think a guy like Dominic Bailey is going to be huge off the edge and replacing that. He comes back as one end of that edge rushing tandem. And the linebackers are intact. Jeremiah Thielander and Arian Carter are both back. So I'm buying the defense. What I am questioning is they were +6 in the turnover margin last year. The defense could take it away, but if we start chucking interceptions left and right as the passing game continues to be emphasized, I don't know that they're going to be able to rely on the running game, at least where I sit here in the middle of July. I'm not going to pencil in the same rushing production that they had last season. So if Aguilar comes in and is a little bit looser with the football, that could spell disaster in some of those close games that Tennessee likes to play. That's what concerns me more than anything, I think, as we get through these previews.
Yeah, this is the team in the SEC I think I'm a little bit out on in terms of just teams taking that step. Obviously, I don't think any of us expected them to be a playoff repeat with the stuff that they lost, but I think we're really undervaluing how big of a loss Dylan Sampson is. He was their offense. I mean, they ran the football, and that was like kind of just what they did, right? They relied on him. Nico didn't turn the ball over all that often, and that was it. If they turn the ball over, they don't have that guy. He's not in there. Dylan Sampson was special. He's a very good running back. They gave him the ball plenty, and he did what he needed to with it. I'm going to be out on Tennessee, and I can feel like an idiot for it later. They don't really have a tough schedule, so they might end up getting a little bit of a benefit in that schedule. They don't really play like all of the top teams. But when you play Bama and Georgia, when you play a team like, an Oklahoma or a Florida who are looking a little bit better, I think you probably end up dropping some of those and maybe just toss in one more for good measure somewhere in there where it's just, some team sneaks up and gets them that you weren't maybe expecting to. I'm going to be out on Tennessee for this year. I don't hate it. I think that Josh Heupel's a good coach, but I need to see that offensive system works outside of an elite all-time running back or some other type of, amazing player that's transcendent. We've seen guys fill in and do that. I don't think that guy's on the roster this year.
Yeah, when you think back to the elite offenses that they've had, I think back to 2022 with Hendon Hooker and Jaden Hyatt and those guys, it was elite talent. It was an elite college quarterback throwing to really good wide receivers. And Joey Aguilar's fine. I think he's going to be a fine quarterback. Hendon Hooker was a great quarterback. And then name is escaping me right now, but the guy that replaced him came down from Michigan the next year. He was
Joe Milton.
Joe Milton, thank you. Armed like a cannon. He's a fine quarterback. And it led to 8-4 in the follow-up to the 11-win season with Hendon Hooker. So 8-4 wouldn't shock me with Tennessee because the offense scares me enough that if the defense even just takes a slight step back, I don't think that the offense can bail them out.
Tennessee's offense is predicated on running the ball effectively, bringing your safeties into the box, and then throwing to a speedster up the seam. Right. I mean, that was the recipe for success the last several years. Whether or not they have that, I think Braylon Staley's a burner. Mike Matthews is going to get a chance to shine. Chris Bizzell is just a monster at 6'5", I believe is what he's listed at. Came over from Tulane last year. So plenty of talent, but if that running game isn't as efficient as what it needs to be, maybe that kind of part A of the offense leaves part B a little bit lacking. I think this is the comfiest 8-4 in the conference. I think they lose all the games that you kind of expect them to lose. Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Florida are who I've got losses penciled in at. And I think they win everything else.
Well, there you have it. 10 teams previewed in just under an hour and 40 minutes. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to get some water, guys, because we've got 6 more coming on Friday. And I'm excited to get into the contenders with a very special guest, if Mitch wants to tell us about that.
Yeah, Lance Barton of Always Talking Ball is going to join us, Alabama guy. Excited to talk SEC. We'll talk with Tyler when it comes to the Notre Dame preview, but you knew we had to get another SEC guy on to break down the contenders, talk about if the Tide can win it all, not just the conference, but a national championship. So don't miss Friday's episode.
It's going to be a good one. Make sure that you're following along on all of our socials at 3TechPod on Twitter and Instagram. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're super close to hitting some really cool milestones over there. So we'd love if you tell a friend. If you're enjoying the show, leave us a 5-star rating too. It really helps us with algorithms on those podcast platforms. But until Friday, for Garrett Turney and for Mitch Mason, I'm Trey Reeves. We'll see you guys next time.